Hello, everybody. Thank you again for joining the webinar today. My name is Matt Bruggeman. I'm a Director of Federal Sales here at A-LIGN. So I oversee all of our basically NIST-based assessments. You know, we're a 3PAO, C3PAO for FedRAMP, CMMC. Today, we're going to be focusing on CMMC as a conversation. We're going to be looking at basically the last 3 months primarily. We're going to talk a little bit about what's to come next. But since we are maybe closer to 3.5 months in now to assessments starting, we thought it'd be cool to take a look back, what we've learned thus far, and not just from A-LIGN's perspective. We are honored today to be joined by Daniel Akridge, the Director of Engagement from Summit 7. Daniel, do you want to do a quick introduction on yourself and Summit 7?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to meet everybody. As you mentioned, my name is Daniel Akridge. My background has actually been working for a living, I say, which is technical work. And then I pivot over to a sales role a few years back. So any questions you have in chat, technical, non-technical compliance, Matt and I can conquer them together as we go through today. A little bit about Summit 7. I jokingly say we specialize in all the acronyms people love to hate. So CMMC, CUI, ITAR, FOCI, NIST, on the technical implementation and preparatory work, right? When it comes to making sure that your environment is going to pass the assessment that Matt and his team will be performing for you. So that's what our organization does. We just got our CMMC certification a few months back. And we just finished our 25th client certification, which is also really fun to be able to say. So this is a really good time to do this webinar. 3 months back, we have a lot of experience under our belt getting our clients through certifications on the technical side. And Matt, on the other side, on the assessment side, looking for potholes and landmines to make sure that everyone's aware of before they get into their formal assessment. So looking forward to the webinar today.
Absolutely. That's great. And when Daniel says he can cover the technical questions, he truly means it. This guy is, like he said, technical first and foremost, then has moved into more of a sales role. But that's why I think we're very grateful to have him here today. Any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat there. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. High level agenda here. Let's look at a current landscape. No CMMC webinar would be complete without a brief overview as to what is CMMC, what are the levels. Daniel, how many times do you think you've gone over that now in your lifetime?
Oh, here's the funny part, because I think ChatGPT still has it wrong. People still come to me thinking there's 5 levels of CMMC. And so I have to, just that level of education, believe it or not, it's still in the ecosystem that we have to spread, because people are finally hearing from their prime saying, do this CMMC. They type it in AI, get me CMMC, and like, there's 5 levels of CMMC. Which level do you need to be? So they come to us saying, I need to be level 3. I'm like, I'm sorry, I think you mean level 2. Long story short, we have to explain that quite a bit. So
yeah. Well, that's good to hear, actually. I think that means our jobs are safer from AI than we might think if it's not catching up to the basics. Yeah.
I think so. Knock on wood.
Yeah, let's hope that continues. So we'll do a quick current landscape. What is CMMC? Where are we at with it? But then again, primarily we want to focus on a look back. The assessments have started and the program has been effective and finalized for a little over 3 months now. So we want to look back at some lessons learned, misconceptions, what we're seeing in the market right now in terms of clients, both on the prep side, as Daniel and his team do, and then on the assessment side, as A-LIGN does. And then we're going to talk a little bit about what's next. There's a lot of confusing acronyms, as Daniel mentioned. I can attest to that people do indeed hate them based on the conversations I have with clients. So we're going to go through a few more of those acronyms that we're talking about. 48 CFR, what is this? What does that mean? What's the future of CMMC? All that fun stuff. So let's get into it with a dive into the current landscape. Okay, here we go. ChatGPT has got nothing on us. Here's a CMMC overview. The CMMC framework, it was finalized October 15th of 2024. What is CMMC? It is designed to enforce the protection of sensitive data shared between the Department of Defense and its DIB suppliers, right? DoD prime and subcontractors, all the way to external service providers. Basically, wherever that sensitive data is, they want to make sure it's protected. They have had requirements in place for you to protect it. CMMC has come in to enforce it. Now the police are showing up. That's what the C3PAOs are. We're coming in to validate that you're meeting these 110 practices as outlined in NIST 800-171 revision 2. So then, okay, who needs it? We kind of went over this, but the Defense Industrial Base, DIB, mark your acronym
bingo.
I think we should hand out bingo cards before this starts.
We should.
We say, and their service providers, right? So a lot of times clients will come to me and they'll think, oh, I don't do work with the DoD. This isn't applicable to me. That is not necessarily the case. Again, follow the data. Wherever it flows, there is requirements within the CMMC program to flow down those contract requirements. If it's a prime to a sub to an external service provider, whatever that might be. When do I need CMMC? A big question. Let's dive into it a little bit here. There's a little bit of nuance that we'll cover towards the end of this as well. The long and short of it, though, is this is beginning to show up in contracts for our clients. The DoD does not put it into their contract requirements quite yet, but what we're seeing is primarily from the prime contractors, they are looking at everybody that they have to flow down requirements to, their subs, their external service providers, and they are telling them to get CMMC certified now, or at least get a plan in place, get on a C3PAO schedule, whatever that might be, so that you make sure that you are set before it shows up into our DoD contract requirements. That's kind of the high level lay of the land. Daniel, anything you want to add color on here?
Yeah, so what's kind of interesting about this, there's kind of two sides to look at it. There's the private contract and there's the contract with, or the prime contract, right? So a private contract between a sub and a prime, they can put these requirements in whenever they want. They could say, we want you to be CMMC certified tomorrow, and in order to work with us, you got to keep doing that, right? The prime to the DoD, they get to actually do whatever the contracting officer at the DoD says. So let me back up for just a second here. The DoD will set the requirement, CMMC level 1, 2, or 3, for the solicitation. It will then have to be proven at time of contract award that you can meet those requirements. And not only that, but the prime has to, if they're flowing the data down, has to show that their supply chain is also meeting those requirements. So either a certification or a self-attestation. One really important thing to note, because people ask me all the time, Daniel, but I'm a 15-person company. I'm a 100-person company, a 200-person company. I don't have resources to get compliant. Isn't the DoD going to exempt me from this, from the CMMC burden upon which I am under? And the short answer to that is actually no. So the way that this works, DoD will be able to give exemptions at a contract level, not at a company level for CMMC. So if you're on a contract 10 rows down in the supply chain, tier 10 supplier making wire harnesses, that would mean the F-35 contract has to be exempted from CMMC, right? So just be aware that wherever the data goes, the requirements to protect the data follows that. And your prime is not going to be held responsible to make sure that their whole supply chain can provide evidence that they're doing it correctly.
That's a really great point. I don't believe that the odds are good that a contract with F-35 would be exempt from these types of requirements, to your example.
Yeah, that seems pretty sensitive to the DoD these days. Yeah, so the fact that China did a copy paste of our F-35 is a leading indicator why it might still be sensitive. So
yeah, but that's a really good point. There was a lot of conversation around the different levels, and when the final rule came out, there was this level 2. So within level 2, there was self-attestation or C3PAO third-party assessment for a certification. So I think a lot of people were kind of hoping or sitting on the fence to say, oh, well, let's wait to see. Maybe I can just self-attest. And then there was a memo that came out and kind of clarified, to your point, this would be at a contract level, not at a contractor level, because they're going to deem this is the type of data, this is how sensitive we think it is or not. If we don't think it's very sensitive, we may exempt it, but it is on a per case basis. And so I think if you're watching this and you think you might be a part of this, the odds are extremely high that you would be required to not only meet the CMMC requirements, but likely if you have controlled and classified information, get audited by a C3PAO or assessed for a level 2 certification.
And I just posted a link in chat, and this is maybe catching some people up because who knew the DoD was bad at communicating to the supply chain? They posted this memo about a month ago, a little over a month ago, publicly. It's been circulating internally to the DoD contracting officers. Basically about how they're going to separate, do you get to self-attest? Do you have to certify? And broad stroke, it basically says if you have anything in the defense CUI, what they call organizational index or CUI category, you're going to have to certify. Anything outside of that, it's basically at the contracting officer's judgment, whether to allow you to self-attest or if it's high enough risk to require certification too. So it's really important to know if you're in manufacturing, if you're in research, Even if you're in construction, a lot of the primary categories and the type of data you have would fall under controlled technical information, which is a defense category, which then prompts you to have to be certified. So
Yep.
that whole, I can probably get out of self-attestment for the majority of the industries that work with the DoD, ironically enough, are likely not going to be able to be exempt and be able to self-attest.
Yep, exactly. So if you have any further questions on that, I'm glad Daniel linked that. Click on that, read through it, maybe look at those different categories and judge for yourself. So let's continue on here. Moving past kind of the CMMC overview, where we are, who needs it, what might be required of you. Let's talk through the actual assessment process. So again, we're a little over 3 months in. There is an official CMMC assessment process. You'll never guess what the acronym is. It is CAP, indeed. So this is put together by the C3PAO accreditation body, the Cyber AB. It's a document that has been put together. And it outlines, hey, here are the phases of how we're going to conduct assessments in an attempt to create some level of uniformity and consistency across assessments and properly assessing vendors across the many different C3PAOs that are in the ecosystem. So I'll go through at a high level some of the different phases and maybe talk about some of the misconceptions maybe that we've seen with clients thus far, or maybe where we've seen clients have some stumbling blocks. But high level, it's 4 main phases. Phase 1 is to conduct the pre-assessment. Phase 2, assess conformity to security requirements. Phase 3, complete and report assessment results. Phase 4, issue certificate and close out POAM. Okay, those are the official titles. What does that actually mean? What actually happens in each of these phases? So let's start with phase 1, conduct the pre-assessment. There's a few things going on here. The C3PAO will have to kind of confirm the scope with your organization, the organization seeking certification. But a few of the main things that we need to do to move you on from phase 1 to phase 2 is we need to validate that you have sufficient and complete documentation and validate that you have the availability of evidence, artifacts. So, when you think of the actual assessment, there's a set of documentation, primarily your system security plan, different policies and procedures that outline your compliance, your story of how you're meeting these security requirements that you need to meet. And then what we need to do as the C3PAO is we need to use the examine, test, interview methodology to actually validate you're doing what you say you're doing. So before we actually get into the weeds of that in phase 1, what we're doing is, do you have that documentation there, and is it sufficient enough for us to be able to properly assess what's going on? Do you have the availability of evidence and artifacts for us to go in and validate that you're doing what you say you're doing? We have actually seen a good amount of clients have issues passing through phase 1 successfully in the very early days. This is one of the early sort of issues that we've seen when we started looking at 1, 2, and 3 months in. What are we seeing as common showstoppers or pitfalls with organizations? And I will say specifically in this early categorization, we're seeing either insufficient levels of completedness on like their system security plan as an example, or really, when this is really more once we get into the assessment, but a mismatch between what you say you're doing and what you're actually doing. Both of them individually would have been fine, but the fact that they don't match does not bode well for your overall compliance and the story that you're doing this, and your organization is aware of this. Once you pass phase 1, phase 2 is what you would think of as actually being audited or assessed. This is when we're actually looking at each of those 110 requirements or practices within the 800-171 Rev 2 framework, and we're marking met or not met. Even more than that, I make sure to highlight this for every client. We are not checking 110 things. Per each 110 practice, there are X number of assessment objectives that a C3PAO needs to assess. In total, that gets to 320 assessment objectives. So when you are moving from, hey, we're preparing for CMMC and we're preparing for this audit, to moving into the assessment, make sure you're outlining and looking at each of those assessment objectives. Because as a C3PAO, what we need to come in is mark met or not met on each assessment objective. And if any of those are not met, the practice that it is tied to is not met, and then you cannot receive your certification. So make sure you're looking at all of those. This is, again, when we're going to be interviewing key personnel, looking through screenshots, evidence, artifacts that you're providing to show that you're meeting these different controls. After we move out of that, phase 3, that's really reporting. That's more stuff on the back end, boring stuff that the C3PAO needs to do in terms of gathering assessment results, uploading it into the DoD's EMAS system, all that fun stuff. Phase 4, this is where there's a little bit of nuance. So if everything was marked as met, you had all 320 assessment objectives and thus all 110 practices marked as met, you get your level 2 CMMC certification. Congratulations, that's your end goal. You did it. If, however, you fell short of any of those and you meet of certain thresholds, you can move into this other option here, which says close out POAMs, which lends the question, oh, we get POAMs? So if you have any findings, there are 2 thresholds you need to meet to get into this category. Number 1, you need to meet at least 80% of the overall 110 practices, which equals 88. Simple math there. So if you're meeting 88 out of the 110, and any of those that were not met are only 1-pointers, those of you that have been like self-attesting for a while are very familiar. There's 1, 3, and 5-point value practices. So any of them that are 1-pointers, and if you're meeting at least 88 out of the 110, you can get a conditional certificate, and it is conditional upon what? Well, you get 180 days to put those not met items into a plan of action and milestone. And then in those 180 days, you get to remediate those, re-engage with a C3PAO, submit your new evidence, and basically get reassessed on just those items. And then if you are then meeting those, that conditional certificate gets changed to a full CMMC level 2 certificate, which is the end goal again. That was a lot to run through. Daniel,
that was a lot. I mean, you went through fast, and that was a great overview, because I have a question for you.
Great. I was hoping you would.
I've got so many. So the 1 points, that's one thing, right? Those are kind of low hanging fruit. If we're not good on 1 points, chances are you got a few 3 and 5 points probably not dialed in quite yet. Which brings me to my question that we get asked all the time, right? Hey, what if in your discovery, let's use the 3.1.1 access control, right? Authorization of users and devices and service accounts. If I don't meet all the assessment objectives, and this is during the live assessment, and let's say I have 1 of the 6 not completed, are you going to allow me to just quickly remediate that for an additional, during that same assessment period? Do I have any, fixing time, I guess you could say? Or is it like, if it's not right, the minute I look at it, it's not right and you fail? What does that look like?
Fantastic question. We get this a lot as well. There is some leniency built into the system. So within phase 2, how they have outlined it is you get up to 10 business days by the end of our phase 2 assessment to resubmit any evidence for anything that you had previously marked as not met. So the way that phase 2 will actually work is, because the other question that I think ties into this that I get a lot is, when will I know, or when will I know that I failed the assessment, right? Or that I am failing the assessment. We will have daily meetings with you. You'll be very aware as to how the assessment is going through the entire process. So if you did have a 3 or 5-pointer, or really any items marked as not met, or even 1 single assessment objective under that marked as not met, we'll make you aware of it. We'll say, hey, this is what we found today. Here's why. Then you can immediately begin to remediate that, put together new documentation. And then again, you have up to 10 business days by the end of our phase 2 to resubmit that to us. So there's a lot of questions out there right now. And I'm actually going to be talking at Summit 7's conference, CS2.
You are, CS2.
I'm going to be on the C3PAO panel, and this is what we're going to be talking about. It's called the gap in our cap. Basically, what gaps are we seeing in the CMMC assessment process in terms of maybe some ambiguities in the language or the requirements? This is a major one that we're going to talk about there. Basically, the question becomes, is there an unlimited amount of things that I can fix in that time? The stance that I think most C3PAOs are taking right now, because there is not clarity in the CMMC assessment process guide, is that if you can get it done in that amount of time, go for it. But what we've been told is, and what I think the intent was, is there's only up to 10 business days that you get to do this. So I think the intent is, if it's anything major, you're not likely to get it done in that amount of time, right? If it's overhauling and completely shifting your model into GCC high because you weren't before, that's not going to happen. So I think the intent was for minor fixes, but as it reads today, anything that you're able to fix in that amount of time, we're able to reassess within that phase 2 before you need to worry about failing the assessment or putting it into a plan of action milestone if it's a one-pointer.
That's really good to know, because people are just so nervous going into this, right? Because I hate to say it, but CMMC, at least for the people that I talk to, it seems to have been deemed an IT problem. It's like, well, CMMC is not an IT problem. It's an organizational problem, right? IT just happens to bear the brunt of a lot of the controls from an implementation standpoint. And a lot of IT people are very nervous. Their job's on the line. It's like, if I get one little ding, I'm done. It's like, no, you do have a little bit of grace to be able to remediate. But to your point, Matt, if you've got to move to a FedRAMP cloud in 10 days, God bless you, right? If you've got to try and find FIPS validated network appliances, like within 10 days installed and everything, that could also be very difficult, right? And so when you start looking at some of the bigger things, even some physical access controls, like it could just take a while to get some stuff implemented. So you almost need to have your own independent risk register saying, if I fail these, it takes me 5 days to get a firewall, 30 days to migrate. You know, you need to start making a little bit of a list there.
Kind of outline in your head, hey, how long would these take? And are we ready to take action on that if that is a finding as soon as possible so that we can get it done in that amount of time? The other thing I'll say is, because we get that a lot as well, the pre-assessment can help catch some of that stuff, because if your documentation's not in a row, the assessment's not going to go well, right? That's one catch. But the other one I always mention is we perform, we call them mock audits. A lot of C3PAOs will do this. Basically, it's us going in and looking at those 320 assessment objectives. It's like taking the pre-SAT before the SAT. Let's just give you a score, see how you did. You can get a chance to feel out what interview questions did they ask of who on my team. Were we short on any specific pieces of evidence that like we're actually compliant, but we just weren't able to prove it in the way that we thought we were maybe able to prove it. So if you are looking to really, really push off any risk of failing this assessment as much as possible, I would definitely look into getting a mock audit from a C3PAO. I would probably say even the C3PAO that's going to perform your full assessment for certification, so you can get that same sort of approach and methodology that they're going to share with you. Daniel, anything else you want to ask or add before we move on?
No, I think this is good. The only outstanding question I had was, can someone do my mock assessment and my actual assessment? And you answered that right at the end there. So it looks like obviously it's probably curtailed how much advice you can give in the mock assessment, if any, but it's nice to get comfortable and do a dry run of the real things. So.
Yeah. And I think a lot of questions, I'll get that question a lot too. They'll say, or not even a question, they'll come to me and they'll say, well, obviously I know you couldn't do something like a mock audit and then also be our assessor. And I say, well, not so fast. We cannot cross the line of advising or consulting. We have to follow our code of professional conduct. As long as we don't do that, as long as we just perform a mock audit and we're just auditing you and we're showing you the results, which is what we do, we're not crossing any line of independence. We can still be your assessor for your level 2 certification. What would cross that line, to your point, Daniel, is if then we said, hey, here's the finding, here's why, and here's what I would recommend you go do to fix that. We do not go to that level, right? So we make sure, and I would advise that's probably the best path, because again, if you do that with the same C3PAO that's going to perform your assessment for certification, again, you build that familiarity in terms of their approach, the process, what they'll ask, all that fun stuff. Okay,
very good.
Let's move on to the heart of this webinar, a look back. I think what I primarily wanted to do here, Daniel, you guys have been, what's interesting is as a C3PAO, obviously there was the joint surveillance assessments and mock audits and things like that, but really the day in, day out heavy work of this began in earnest a little over 3 months ago. You guys have more data for going further back than that, because you've been helping clients with compliance predating CMMC even. So I'm interested to hear from you, and I'll throw it over to you, and then I may ask some follow-up questions, particularly from implementing clients in the past to moving into now, okay, what is actually required in the CMMC final rule? Because obviously there's some nuances and some differences, especially around external service providers and things like that. What are you seeing in the clients that you're working with day in and day out as some common misconceptions, challenges, et cetera, with getting compliant for CMMC level 2?
So this is kind of interesting because of all of the updates that happened in the final rule that was published in December. It's like, this is the CMMC Bible of what's going to be allowed, right? So when we're looking at that, a lot of people thought, oh, I've got to get my MSP certified. No, wait, no, I don't. I have to do this. I have to do that, right? So now that we have the final document, a little over 4 months old now, these are the things that we're seeing that even some of them predate CMMC, to your point, Matt, back in the DFAR 7012 days. We've been operating and working on this problem, Summit 7, since 2017, 2018. So we've seen this kind of misconceptions, you could say, just around some really core things. The first one is data flow. So when people come to me, they're knocking on my door, Daniel, my boss said, oh my gosh, we have to get CMMC certified or we're going to lose our defense business, right? It's like, okay, we don't want that to happen. So let's talk about it, right?
Take
well, how do you, well, all right, take a deep breath, right? Right, here's his Xanax anyways. But it's like, hey, we first need to figure out how much data do you get from Lockheed or Boeing or whoever, right? That is sensitive in nature.
Yeah.
This sensitive data we're talking about is controlled unclassified information. Sometimes it's also ITAR or EAR. So if you're doing work on behalf of a federal contract, you either could be in receipt of or generating CUI, right? So that's kind of the guise. This is CMMC level 2 and potentially level 3 a little bit later on. So the first question is data flow. If you're getting the data via a DoD safe link, okay? If you're getting it via email, if you're getting it via a piece of paper through FedEx, if you're getting it through a USB drive that's sent to you, these are your first, what we call ingestion points. Okay, let's start some interview process. Let's talk to the BD and sales team and figure out, what kind of things they're getting. Let's talk to contracts. Let's talk to operations. Let's talk to delivery and figure out kind of what that data flow looks like. We put together a CUI keyword search that's really good to run through your M365 tenant, just to kind of get an idea of users and email and SharePoint and Teams that could be impacted by it. If you're interested in that, feel free to message me on LinkedIn and I'll be happy to send that to you. But the worst thing that you could do is get into a design for CMMC that doesn't meet the needs.
Yep.
So one of the pieces added to the CMMC level 2 scoping guidance is that if a significant architectural change or expansion of network or merger or acquisition takes place, guess what you have to do? You have to go get recertified. So if we're going to build this environment to be compliant, we want to make sure it's an environment that can actually fulfill the needs of the contracts we're going to be receiving, right? So people hear a lot of the enclave versus all-in conversation. So an enclave being a small subset of your users, all-in basically saying, hey, it needs to be everybody. A general kind of good rule of thumb is usually about 15%. If 15% or more of your users need access to CUI, chances are you're probably leaning towards the whole company needing to get adopted in. Versus an enclave is usually less than 15%. Now, again, that depends on the data and the ingestion points and all the things like that. But having a good data flow diagram and knowing where the data is, which IT cannot figure out by themselves, just FYI, knowing that can lead to your design. And your design, if scoped appropriately, if you do the data flow right, could save you hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I don't mean that jokingly. If you overscope, you're going to overpay. And then that boundary, now that you've verified that this is where all the data takes place and is stored, and also it supports the data flow of the organization, then confidently going into your certification, you're not going to have to go get recertified in a year because you had to change the boundary. Yeah. It's really, really important to understand this.
This is critical. And I'm glad you touched on this first, because obviously it's the first thing, to your point, that you need to think about, but also, again, as a C3PAO, we'll have clients come up to us. Hey, I think I need CMMC. I think I need level 2. Can you give me a quote? Okay, great. Let's talk scoping. To your point, let's start with data. What data do you get from who? Who are your clients? And I am constantly shocked at how little of this information is known when people come to me for a quote on a C3PAO assessment. So it shows me how much people maybe need to start here before they start thinking big picture. I just know I need to get assessed. I know I need to get assessed. Oh, I think we're compliant. I ask a few questions around what data they have and where it flows within their organization. And they go, I don't know, I might need to pull somebody else in or whatever it might be. This is absolutely critical. And we see this as well.
And a lot of people, I'll go give everyone fair warning. The majority of the calls I'm having now are like an enclave, right? I just want to put a few users in there to get certified. And the reason that is, I think we're going to talk about timeline a little bit as well, is we're anticipating the rule for CMMC to happen sometime around this summer, potentially early fall. meaning it's going to start showing up in solicitations, right? Which people are really nervous about. So they want the fastest solution. But just because it's the fastest solution doesn't mean it's going to be the right solution for you. So doing the scoping is definitely really important, which leads a little bit to my next question or my next kind of statement here.
Yep.
So customer, client, shared responsibility matrix, you're going to hear it called all sorts of different stuff these days. The official verbiage is customer responsibility matrix, CRM. This is if you're using any kind of MSP, MSSP, any kind of outsourced service support on an ongoing basis. We're not talking one-time project. We're talking someone that's day in and day out supporting your environment. So here's a couple things to think about. Just like you have to do NIST 800-171 Rev 2, which is CMMC level 2, and all 110 controls and all 320 assessment objectives, your external service provider, which is again MSP, MSSP, things like that, has to now take that same framework and fill in the blanks of all the things that they're supporting on your behalf and be able to justify that during your assessment and produce artifacts that they're actually doing the things that they're saying. This is one of the highest risk things that we have seen out there because I've worked for MSPs the majority of my career on the technical side. And MSPs are the most well-meaning organizations that I've ever worked for. They want to do what's best for the client. And so, of course, they're going to say, yes, I'll help you with CMMC. Yes, I'll help you meet those requirements. What they don't realize is the burden that it places on them. It's a significant burden, well above things like HIPAA or PCI compliance or ISO. It's so much more that they have to be involved in, and a lot of them just don't have the staff to do it. So if you are using an external service provider, an MSP, an MSSP, make sure to ask them the question now. I need this shared responsibility, this customer responsibility matrix. I need you to show me all the things you're doing for me because you have to participate in my assessment. Yep. That way you're aligned now, or you need to figure out a way to, and this is not to be mean, terminate the contract and find a partner that can. Because if they can't get you through the certification, one of the requirements in the cap, Matt, that was announced is they have to sit with you during the assessment. They can't just kind of phone it in, right? Or just slide across the document and walk away. So it makes them, very responsible for a large portion of the requirements.
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I was going to ask you if you have a client that is coming to you and saying, hey, I have this, but they're not complying. I'm asking for a CRM. They're either saying they don't have one or they don't know, or they're not willing to give it to me. I was going to ask what advice you give them. So is it just strictly, hey, part ways as quickly as you can and find another vendor for that solution?
Yeah. So the two things we're seeing right now is for years, MSPs have been saying, I'm going to get you compliant, right? And then the CMMC was final in December. From January until now, the amount of conversations I've had of MSPs now backing out because it's actually real is skyrocketing.
Yeah.
And people are having to pay termination fees on these contracts because they signed multi-year. And in the agreements, they didn't specify CMMC requirements that they signed with these MSPs. So they're actually having to come out of their own pocket. Some MSPs are allowing them to terminate on friendly terms. So that's a huge piece of it. The other very interesting piece, and I had a phone call this week about it, there are CMMC implementers and CMMC kind of what I would call dedicated managed service providers that have decided they don't want to do this anymore.
Wow.
So don't be fooled the fact that you signed up with MSP that specialize in CMMC. They need to play by the same rules, right? Just because they're touting an RPO badge on their website doesn't mean that they're qualified or plan to stay in the game long term. Somebody just asked us, we're about to go, this is a customer called, they're like, we're about to go through our assessment and our MSP, our CMMC specialized MSP just called and said, we're getting out of the business. Like that's the last news you want to hear before you're ready to go through an assessment.
Hit the panic button. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. I'm glad you touched on that really quickly because I don't want to spend too much time on this, but you had mentioned up top that you guys just got level 2 certified. Could you talk through what that means as it relates to this?
Yeah. So Summit 7 went through 2 different certifications. So we went through a corporate certification because we do participate in traditional defense contracts. Mm-hmm. But then the other part is we actually got our MSP, MSSP independently certified. And why we did that, and this is kind of cool, Summit 7 uses our own MSP, and our MSP went through the certification as if they were that. Because we wanted to role play what it's actually like to put our MSP through the ringer of a certification, and then they independently got their own certification. So what that shows, and this is a good leading indicator that you're picking a good MSP, if they've pursued and gotten certified, it shows that they can and have met the requirements, and you can just have a deep breath of relief when it comes to that. It's not a requirement for your MSP to be certified, but it's a leading indicator that they're competent in what they're walking you through.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so on this topic of external service providers, the other sort of subcategory there is cloud service providers and service offerings. So my favorite topic, FedRAMP moderate equivalency, and this ties in one of the questions that I saw in here. How will FedRAMP affect this? I've heard rumors of equivalency mapping to CMMC to FedRAMP. Is this accurate? Daniel, could you start to walk us through that puzzle? Why are we talking FedRAMP? This is CMMC, and what your point here is on equivalency.
Yeah, so one of the requirements, this dates back to DFAR 7012, which is kind of the godfather of the CMMC program for protection of CUI, is you have to use a FedRAMP cloud service provider if you're going to put that data in that cloud. Okay. So if you're going to put it in the cloud, and again, a lot of ingestion points of this data is email. So it's fair to assume that most people are using cloud-based email providers now. It has to be in a FedRAMP environment. So like Microsoft Commercial removed their FedRAMP authorization for their commercial cloud. So you have to go to their Gov Cloud in order to get it. So that's a simple example. However, there's a little scapegoat there, right? So if it's FedRAMP authorized at a moderate or high level, they're good to go, 2 thumbs up. Matt and his team will be like, yes, it checks the box, we're good. The DoD wanted a little bit of an out to allow what they call FedRAMP moderate equivalency. So they're not authorized, they're just equivalent. And what that means, according to a memo published by the DoD last January, is that they have to meet all of the FedRAMP moderate requirements. They have to go through a 3PAO assessment, which our good friends at A-LIGN are also 3PAOs, and they can't have any POAM items. So it's actually harder to get FedRAMP moderate equivalent than it is to actually get FedRAMP moderate authorized. The only tricky part of that is you have to be sponsored on the authorization side. And so the reason it's really important to understand this and the nuance of this is that we know cloud providers that are providing CMMC related services that are calling themselves FedRAMP moderate equivalent. Through the Joint Surveillance Program, which was towards the end of last year, which allowed companies to get preemptively CMMC certified, there were multiple times that those assessments were happening where somebody lost their equivalency. And a core part of their infrastructure they were using was now non-compliant, meaning they failed their assessment. So the fact that they're not authorized is a huge corporate risk simply because equivalency can be lost. And you don't want the Russian roulette game of, is it compliant, is it not to hit when you're going through your assessment? Because if it turns out that it's not, then you're going to fail the assessment.
Yeah. It's tough. As Daniel mentioned, we get a lot of questions around this. We are also a 3PAO, so we do FedRAMP assessments. So we get a lot of questions around, and people thinking it's a much lighter lift or much easier path. There are that's not necessarily the case. There are absolutely pros and cons to each of your 2 options as a cloud service provider. FedRAMP authorized at moderate or high, or FedRAMP moderate equivalent. FedRAMP authorized at moderate or high, as Daniel mentioned, that is the traditional path that you've seen. If you've heard of FedRAMP, it is not an easy path. It is not a light lift. And one of the more difficult parts of that is requiring an agency to partner with you to actually grant the authorization through the process or sponsor you through FedRAMP authorization. Through equivalency, there is no need for an agency sponsorship. We're not involving a federal agency. We're not involving the FedRAMP Program Management Office. So that's the pro. The con is, as Daniel mentioned, in there, it outlines that there can be no POAMs, no findings, which is in that sense harder than when you get FedRAMP authorized. So if you have questions around whether you think this is right for you, and one other thing I want to mention is a lot of clients will think, oh, I'm not a cloud service provider. I don't provide the cloud to my clients. Right. That is not, if you have a cloud service offering, like a software as a solution that is hosted in the cloud, that meets the definition. A lot of people try to get out of it by saying either I'm not providing cloud to organizations, or I'm hosted in a FedRAMP authorized cloud, so that means I'm equivalent. That means I'm good. not the case, right?
Not the case. And we see that all the time. Somebody comes to us and says, oh, but their application's hosted in Azure Gov, AWS Gov. It's like, oh, that's great. But if you look at the actual FedRAMP FAQ, it says not compliant. You do not inherit a FedRAMP authorization for your app if you're in a data center that happens to be FedRAMP authorized. No. That's a very good call out, because a lot of people get sadly hoodwinked by that because they're touting, yeah, we're FedRAMP because we're in AWS or Azure. Not so much, sadly.
And I found those clients, they don't even ask it. They'll just throw it in as an aside. They'll say, oh, we're good on that because XYZ. And I say, whoa. Let's dive into that a little bit. Okay, great. Daniel, I'll let you move on to here. FIPS 140-2, validated cryptography certificates. What are you seeing there?
Oh, so many words. We call it the CMMC compliant 4-letter F word, right? So it's like nobody likes FIPS. What FIPS is, and NIST actually runs this program, it's a specific type of cryptographic encryption that's applied to data or data in transit and things like that. So when, and part of your assessment is, for anything that has encryption applied to it to protect the confidentiality of CUI, it's got to have this FIPS validated certificate. And so there's actually a repository that you can go and pull down these certificates that you're going to have to show Matt and his team during the time of the assessment to show, yes, if I'm using encryption, I'm using it on systems that have the actual certificate. Now, Matt, you and I talked about this on a podcast not too long ago. FIPS 140-2 is kind of getting end of life, right? The new version of that is FIPS 140-3. So when we're talking about that, number one, you have to make sure you're possessing those certificates. But number two, if they can't find a -2, is -3 acceptable? Are you guys seeing that that's now acceptable because of the sunsetting of -2?
We are, yeah. And that's what we covered before is we're seeing it as superseding it in that way. So we are accepting 140-3 for clients that can only find that option. I'm curious, what challenges are you, is that the big challenge, is finding 140-2 validated certificates given that it's been sunsetted? Is that the biggest challenge you're seeing?
That's a challenge. People not looking to identify if they're actually, the encryption they're using is FIPS validated is one of the biggest pieces. So I'm dropping the link to the search tool you can find if they are. So like a lot of people are not doing enough due diligence to determine if their appliances are actually meeting the requirement. Cisco, Meraki, Palo on the network side, right? Fortinet, et cetera, because it could be running an older version that just doesn't support it, right? And so when you're going through this little exercise, making sure that you're able to collect those, because to our point earlier, it's really hard to go out and buy a FIPS validated or firewall. And FIPS validated and FIPS compliant are two very different things. So don't be hoodwinked there. It has to be FIPS validated. And that's the other gotcha. A lot of marketing says, yeah, of course we're FIPS compliant. Don't buy that. Buy FIPS validated. And that's one of the big kind of takeaways here for common misconceptions that people are getting kind of led astray by, similar to kind of that equivalency type conversation.
I was going to say, I'm glad you called that out, because anytime I hear that, a client comes to me, they say, hey, we need FedRAMP, hop on a call. They say, yeah, we're looking to get FedRAMP compliant. And then they just go past that. I say, whoa, what are we talking about? FedRAMP compliant. Compliant for what? So if anybody's saying they're compliant, FedRAMP as well, you want to dig in a little bit deeper, because compliant in and of itself doesn't mean anything. That could mean internally they looked at it and they go, yeah, I think we're meeting that baseline. That is no official validation of equivalency or authorized or anything like that, or with FIPS being certified. Okay, Daniel, let's move on to the last one here on your list, specialized assets.
Yep. So specialized assets. So in the CMMC world, there's different asset classifications that play by different rules. There's CUI assets, security protection assets, and one of those is specialized assets. So this is primarily used for operational technology, manufacturing, regulated research uses this a lot for the equipment that they have. And what's nice about it is that it doesn't have to overlay all 110 controls of CMMC. And you're like, oh my gosh, Daniel, how in the world is that? Like, even if it has CUI, yes, even if it has CUI, it doesn't have to play by all 110 rules. But what we are seeing is that organizations traditionally have a pretty flat network, especially on the smaller business side, right? So they don't have any kind of risk-based security policy separating their corporate CUI assets that do have to have the 110 controls away from their specialized assets like their manufacturing floor. And so when you're going through this exercise, one of the things to be very in tune with is, okay, even though all my manufacturing stuff doesn't have to play by the 110 controls directly, I need to have some sort of risk-based policy to just show how I'm protecting those particular assets. And a lot of people aren't either putting in some logical or physical barriers between the two. They're not documenting the how they're actually providing risk-based security policies for those systems. So that's a little bit of a gotcha as well. Just make sure to do due diligence if you're using that type of equipment.
So are you seeing clients that are in this category using that type of equipment with specialized assets? Are you seeing them almost read that or interpret that as, hey, we don't need to meet the 110, so we don't really need to do much, if anything?
That's right. And that's the tricky part is like in CMMC, you've got to write it in your SSP, you've got to do asset inventory, but then you get to designate basically how you're putting security in place for those assets, because a lot of them are running MS-DOS, Windows XP, Windows 2000, like systems that can't even be made compliant if you wanted them to, right? And so you have to put something in place. You can't just document, I have these 50 devices in my manufacturing network. You actually have to say how you're protecting that, right? Are you doing micro segmentation? Are you doing a physical network altogether with a DMZ in between that and your corporate network? What are you actually doing to make sure that that data is protected? Again, doesn't have to align to the 110 controls. It might be a good basis for some of the requirements that you want to put in place, but you have to show something. You can't just document and walk away.
I love it. Okay, we are running tighter on time here. I wanted to move on to what's next, but really quickly, I would be remiss, Daniel, if I didn't have you on a webinar, I didn't at least ask a little bit about this question that I get a ton, because you mentioned it a little bit there. You guys are a Microsoft reseller. The question comes up, hey, can I be, I know you've answered this probably more than any other question. You know what I'm going to say. Can I be compliant in commercial? Do I have to go in Gov? Can I go in GCC High? Like, what do I actually need for compliance? There's some nuance here around export controls. Can you just do your quick little overview? Because again, I get this question a ton. And when I get this question, I say, Daniel is the guy that knows this better than anybody. So I would love it if you could just give us a quick overview on that.
Absolutely. So we are a Microsoft Gov, the largest Gov partner there is out there, which is fantastic to say. The only Azure expert MSP in the Gov cloud, ironically enough. And so we get this question 10 times a day. So there are 3 Microsoft clouds. And there's one question about international companies I'll slightly address here. There's the commercial cloud, which is M365 commercial. It's what you get through GoDaddy or direct through Microsoft. It's the back end of all of that, okay? This allows you to do multi-geo, so you can support multiple different data sovereigns, locations outside of the US. And so that is one type of cloud provider with M365. That is not FedRAMP as of October of last year. Well, that's a problem because CUI in the cloud, to go back to the point before, has to be FedRAMP moderate or higher. And Microsoft Commercial is not. The second cloud for M365 is called GCC, the Government Community Cloud. So the GCC cloud allows you to store basic CUI, but no CUI that has export control or no foreign requirements. Think ITAR, EAR, again, no foreign, things of that nature. And then there's GCC High that does both CUI and the export control no foreign, because Microsoft's supporting you with only US persons. Okay, that's how they're able to meet that requirement. So when you're going through and validating, this is really for any cloud provider, make sure that they're FedRAMP, make sure that they're going to be able to respond to incident response requirements from DFAR 7012, which is 72 hours. Make sure that if you have export control data, that their staff cannot view it in an unencrypted format. That's huge. There's a lot of people that go to a FedRAMP cloud, but the support team on the other side is actually violating their export control agreement. So that's a whole nother kind of can of worms to get into. I'm excited for a lot of these questions that are popping up because there's definitely some more targeted information we'll give here towards the end if there's time.
Definitely. Yeah. Okay. I appreciate that. I just wanted the quick overview because I knew it hit on a couple questions and I know that we both get it a ton. Before we go over to the questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And I will say really quickly, if you have any other questions, throw them in the chat. We, at this point, almost certainly will not be able to get to them all, but we will email responses to anybody and everybody. So if you want an email response at a minimum, throw that in the chat now. Okay, let's talk about what's next, what we can expect moving forward. We had talked about this a little bit, another one of our acronyms. This one might be the free space in the middle, CFR, or maybe CUI would be. 48 CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, what is often referred to as 48 CFR because that is where it is placed within the Code of Federal Regulations. This is the sort of companion rule to the CMMC program rule that was finalized October 15th of last year. Why do we have a companion rule? What does this one do? Well, that one finalized the actual program. This one talks more about its implementation and its requirements and its rollout into DoD contracts, what the contract officers need to do and when. So we wanted to go over a high-level overview here, and then Daniel, I'll let you add any color as well. Phase 1 of the rollout. When does this begin? This begins as soon as the 48 CFR rule is finalized and effective. Daniel mentioned this earlier. Nobody knows for certain what that exact date will be, but we would anticipate, given historical data, the length of the rule, what's in it, all that fun stuff, sometime around this summer, maybe a little bit longer after you give the 60 days for it to become effective. Summer or fall of this year, we would say likely is when that becomes effective. And that is when phase 1 of the rollout into DoD contracts begins. How long is that phase 1? It is 12 months. It is 1 year. So each of these phases that you see on here, I didn't mark it, but they're each 12 months long. So phase 1, applicable self-assessment. So basically within phase 1, it stipulates, hey, contract officers need to put DoD or CMMC requirements into applicable self-assessments. The asterisks I put on here, because I get a lot of clients coming to me and saying, hey, you know, a CMMC level 2 certification is over a year away at a minimum because CFR dictates the first phase doesn't require level 2 certifications. Two things I want to say on that really quickly. Number one, we touched on earlier, that is from the DoD specifically. To Daniel's point, private contracts can really do whatever they want. Primes can, and I have seen some of them, dictate something else. They can say, hey, you need to be level 2 certified from a C3PAO by Jan 1 of 2026 or whatever they want to say, right? So that's number one. Number two, if you are talking I'm talking specifically to the DoD contract. They can't roll it out for at least a year until after 48 CFR. I wanted to highlight this asterisk that I've written down here because I think this is not talked about enough. In that same statement in phase 1, it says DoD may also, at its discretion, include the requirement for CMMC status of level 2 C3PAO, that's a certification from a C3PAO, in place of the level 2 self CMMC status for applicable DoD solicitations and contracts. So what does that mean? They're basically giving the contract officers at their discretion, you need to require a self-attestation to level 2 or a C3PAO assessment to level 2, and it's at your discretion. So what is that going to mean? What are they actually going to put it into? I think time will only tell, and it's a little bit TBD, but I wanted to call that out for clients because I think they think as it's written, there is absolutely no way that they're going to put a level 2 certification from a C3PAO requirement for the first year. And plain as day right here, they write, it's at the contract officer's discretion about whether they want to do that or not.
And that's a little bit of the tricky thing. So going back to that memo that we posted in chat earlier in the session, the DoD is giving guidance to their contracting officers preemptively. Hey, this is when you're going to apply certification. This is when you can do self-attestment unless it's high risk. And right now, the target is basically any controlled technical information, critical infrastructure pieces are a part of that with defense installations, naval nuclear propulsion information and NPI data. So those are basically a promised certification. And it's going to apply to new contracts, but it's also going to apply to contract option years once 48 CFR is finalized. And so a lot of companies are like, oh, like our BD team doesn't have anything coming up for a little while. I'm like, oh, great. Okay, that's great. But do you have anything coming up for an option year later in the second half of 2025? And they're like, yeah. I was like, well, just be prepared. There could be application of CMMC to that option year for you to be able to retain that contract. And so just be aware, there are things in motion here. The DoD is already educating internally what to certify, what not to certify, even out of the gate with their discretion, you could say. And then after phase 2 and phase 3, it just starts picking up speed, right? It's just going to keep running. And a couple of things that people ask all the time, they're like, well, Daniel, I thought CMMC was going to get doged. Isn't all this just going to go away? It's like, well, the DoD CIO, as Katie Arrington was just appointed, She happened to have started CMMC back in 2020. So she's the godmother of CMMC, and she is pushing very hard not only to have this applicable to the defense industrial base, but she's working with the FAR Council to see if they can federalize CMMC across all agencies. So that's again hearsay. There's nothing formal with that. There is a FAR CUI proposed rule that we could talk about, but cyber threats are real, and the response to that is we need to protect the data because it doesn't need to get into North Korea, China, Russia's hands, right? So
I'm glad you touched on that. I get a lot of clients too that say, oh, well, we don't, we have like a whatever 3-5 year contract. So I won't have to worry about this. So option years are a thing. So I'm glad you called that out. So really quickly, again, you can see on here the phase 2, phase 3, phase 4, it just increases in terms of what they're going to roll this out into and which requirements they're going to roll out. Eventually they'll start rolling out level 3 requirements for applicable contracts. And again, each of those is going to be 12 months, but we've just got a few minutes left. I've seen some messages. Some people have to leave early. Thank you guys so much for joining us. If you do, we're going to try to get to 1 or 2 questions, and then we'll answer the rest over email. We'll copy anybody that wants to be copied on those. One that I'm seeing here, Daniel, I think this is one of the first ones and definitely one of the top most upvoted. This will be for you. Are there specific RMM tools that are compliant, or can we have just have a policy and process to say, yes, BitLocker, firewall, MFA, whatever are in place?
Okay, this is a fun one. So number one, Ninja RMM is in the process of authorization. However, there's really no traditional RMM tools that are in the FedRAMP marketplace. So your answer there is to self-host in your own FedRAMP infrastructure, Azure, AWS, whatever it might be, or host it on-prem. But this is one of the biggest holdups for MSPs is that their tech stack can't meet the FedRAMP requirements. Now, you can put policies and technical restrictions in place to try and bring RMM out of scope for CUI. Disable file transfer, disable screen capture, right? Disable screen recording, all those types of things, right? So there are things you can do to mitigate and try and push that out, but then you're also limiting the impact that it can give your client, right? So things are going to take longer, slower, et cetera. So there is a fine nuance to that. So yes, it can be out of scope. It's very difficult to do. And no, sadly, there's no FedRAMP. You would need to self-host inside of a compliant boundary.
Great. I love it. Very succinct, which is what we need right now. We're doing rapid fire.
Rapid fire. Keep it going.
Daniel Akridge, everybody. All right. What are the thoughts? You talked about sunsetting when we were talking about FIPS 140-2 to 140-3, another 2 to 3 sunsetting. We talked about NIST 800-171 revision 2 is what's currently required under DFAR 7012 and CMMC. What are your thoughts on the timeline for moving to Rev 3 of 800-171? Since I believe the FAR clause will be Rev 3, there's some other nuances to that, but high level thoughts on the timeline for the move to Rev 3 requirements under NIST 800-171.
Great question. So here's what's funny. Canada already adopted Rev 3 for their equivalent CMMC program, even though there's not technical reciprocity there, which is a whole nother fun topic. It's probably going to happen under what they would refer to as the CMMC 3.0 revision. That's not technically what it's called, but that's what we're calling it. Yeah. It could be as early as end of next year, middle to end of next year. FAR CUI in the proposed state, still hard-coded Rev 2, but again, it's proposed. It could very easily change to be synced up with the latest requirement closer to the final publication.
Yeah, and I would say, I think I just read the end of that question. Last I heard was from December when it said Q2 of 2025 was possible. No, it is not happening anytime immediately to move to Rev 3. Okay, let's see if we can get one more in here. Okay, this is probably good because this has to do kind of a little bit with CUI marking. This specific example from Nicholas, we receive an email from a customer with a PO that includes the part name and part number with a link to the portal to download the CUI engineering drawing. Is the PO itself now CUI because it has the part name and part number?
No. It's very likely not going to be. It's going to follow the federal contracting information, so it's private information. But there is some gotchas, like there is with all compliance fun stuff. The classic "it depends" response, and that is if they're attaching things, drawings, schematics, specifications that are only known on behalf of that defense contract and would fall under controlled technical information, then yes, that would end up becoming in scope. But if it's just a PO, part number, generic name, quantity, price, then you're likely okay.
Beautiful. Daniel Akridge, thank you so much for joining us. I thought this was lovely. Anybody, again, thank you guys so much for joining that's still hanging around, and anybody that's watching this later. If you have any follow-on questions, feel free to reach out to A-LIGN, myself specifically, Daniel, Summit 7. We're happy to help. Daniel, any parting last words?
Nope. Well, the only thing is, if you haven't started CMMC, it's time to start now.
That's right. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all so much, and we'll see you next time.